Alex, I know this is probably the most random encounter you've had this year. And I say that in a one of those kind of ways. Anyway, it's so good to meet you. I think I first saw your name pop up in a random kind of Twitter feeds. I think someone had retweeted something that you had written about First Bloom, which is your company. And I saw coffee. Yeah, really, I'm sold after coffee, but the intent there, it becomes even better. So let's start with who you are, what you do, and then we can kind of take it from there.
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, I appreciate you reaching out, David, as well, and kind of having me on here. It was a random encounter, not in that way, but definitely up there in terms of like sliding into the DMs for a fun time. So I appreciate that. Yeah, so a bit about me. My background is in engineering. I started as a programmer when I was like 16, just kind of learning the ropes. Doing a lot of freelance work and just kind of figuring things out. And then eventually I got a job at a startup in Montreal. And that was kind of like my first swing at being in the startup culture and just kind of actually doing development work. From there, I joined another startup, met my co-founder there, and we kind of ventured off into coffee kind of at the same time. I was in it a couple of years before him and just kind of like dragged him kicking and screaming into it. He'd always kind of understood it, liked it, and I just kept making him Americanos at work. And then he just kind of fell in love, and that's kind of how First Bloom started, really.
Nice. Well, I mean, you bonded over something eventually.
Yeah.
which you would think that coffee, especially within the software and engineering world. I work for a tech company on the day job side. And, you obviously have a pedigree in that space as well. Coffee tends to be that ubiquitous brown liquid that everybody kind of, goes to the break room for because they got a, midday refuel or they've been burning the midnight oil, as the expression goes, right? So that's really cool. I mean, I'm glad you brought them along with you. I mean, I think that's important. When we look at coffee, we look at kind of the institution of coffee, we look at where coffee is usually served, right? A lot of that focus is around society, it's around social kind of behaviors, right? So I always ask this question and everybody comes on here. I think I pre-warned you as well. What in your own words, and to you, what does community mean to you? And you can actually put the lens of coffee on that if you want to.
Yeah.
So take it away.
Yeah, totally. Community to me is really kind of a system of trust and kindness. And that's kind of what I've landed on over the past couple of years. If you're not welcoming, you don't really have a community. And if you have high barriers to entry, it's a form of community, but it's not a very productive one. And I've kind of really wanted to create a space personally, but also just kind of getting into them of acceptance and being welcoming to people who are interested in joining that community. And really just having each other's backs, but also being willing to call each other out when there's bullshit flying around and being comfortable saying truths to each other in a way that don't hurt feelings, but also, kind of elevate and bring people forward along with you. I don't know if any of that's really making sense in this context.
Oh, it does.
Cool. But yeah, that's really kind of what I've been landing on and trying to understand those systems of trust and understand those systems of kindness, but also candid feedback so people can continue to grow.
Yeah, I think that's important. There's a phrase, I'll steal it from the Bible for a second, and speak the truth in love. Or maybe that wasn't from the Bible, but hey, whatever, pedigree. Speaking that truth in love and being willing to, embrace the wildly varied nature of community, right? All sorts. Yeah. It's not just hipster fuel. You know what I mean? Like it's everybody. I remember my grandma, growing up. I mean, this was her water. There was no. You always knew Grandma Rempel would be pouring that cup first thing in the morning. Old Mr. Coffee Maker. I mean, that stuff smelled like turpentine. Oh, yeah. But it got the job done, right? And it was always that kind of. It was a known. It was a constant, right? So. Yeah. I appreciate that, especially when you mentioned the words trust. I think anytime I hear the word trust kind of show up, especially given my research for academically, it's always intriguing to me because, yeah, you're bonding over this idea or ideal, right? Single purpose or multiple purposes, but you're kind of finding unity in this, and it takes a lot to be able to reach across even the digital divide now. Like I'm talking to you, and you're in Montreal, I'm outside of Boston, and yeah, there's a level of trust here. I'm not going to lead you down paths that you're not going to believe, and that you're not going to be able to support or whatnot. So coffee community. It's a wonderful thing. So what started your passion for coffee? Please don't tell me it was programming.
No. The caffeine became a positive side effect, actually. I mean, I was kind of I don't know if you're familiar with what a double double is, but it's basically 2 cream, 2 sugar from McDonald's or Tim Hortons here. And that was like my fuel when I was working retail sales at a computer company. And it kind of snowballed after I started getting into wine, actually, and unpacking that part of just culinary experience, I guess, and wanting to replicate that as closely as I could during the day, because you have these moments of intention and being aware and like really embracing what you're drinking so that you can have those mindful moments. And it was actually a friend of mine who took me to a cafe in Montreal called La Finca. Big shout out to them. They have the best Chemex in town, 100%. And they found out, they were like, hey, you're really into this. Do you want to just do like a flight of Chemexes? I'm like, okay, sure. So they brought over 3 Chemexes back to back. I've never vibrated so hard in my life. But it was like the most amazing experience because it opened my eyes to natural Ethiopian coffee, which was like drinking blueberry cobbler. My mind was completely fucking blown. Like I needed this at home, right? And that was the catalyst for me falling into this rabbit hole, like picking up a V60, getting a grinder, trying to do this like every day. And it became a ritual. And it just like opened my world to not only an amazing experience that you can have multiple times during the course of your day, but it gives you a break, helps you walk away. There's amazing people in this industry. We're trying to support systems that are off the beaten path, that aren't part of commodity coffee trading, where people are getting paid a bit better. We're trying really hard to make that part of coffee consumption less commodity and more value focused. And all of those things just kind of like hit every check mark for me. I was like, okay, I gotta stay in this. I gotta figure out a way to make this work. And that's kind of why.
Right. So out of that, got to make this work came what was its First Bloom the first iteration of this, or has this been a journey, a process? What's gotten you to where you are?
Yeah, it's definitely been a process. So that same friend who introduced me, we actually started an Instagram page together. Him and my other good friend are super into cycling, and I have a background in photography as well. So I was like, okay, well, what we can do is we can create this cycling and coffee community, since they go hand in hand. I'll take the photos, you guys ride your bikes, and we'll just bond over that. And so we did that for about a year. And in that time, I realized that there was a segment of the market in coffee that was kind of underserved, but also untapped. And there was this growth happening where you could just see more and more people starting to look at it and see, hey, there's this other thing, like coffee doesn't have to be loaded with milk and sugar. It can taste great on its own. And so I kind of tried to figure out how can we make it work and how can we turn something into, I don't know, a piece of technology or whatever it is, right? So we actually developed an app that was kind of like the Untapped or Vivino for coffee. Didn't work out the way we anticipated. Coffee is inherently way more complicated than either of those things, for a whole host of reasons. But so that kind of, it took off. We got a couple thousand users. It was like, okay. But what we realized is that the actual market that needs to be serviced is the one of people like myself 5 years ago, where they heard about it, they were looking at it, they tried to replicate it at home, and it sucked. Yeah. And then they were just like, well, why am I going to spend, $18 to $25 per bag when I can go to the grocery store and get a pound of coffee for $8? Doesn't make sense, right? Exactly.
Or you drive towards these, never compostable, K-cups that are ruining the environment. And I have a ton of them.
Yeah. And it's that convenience and that like, well, fuck it. If I can't make the experience what I want it to be, then why am I going to invest the time? And so that's where we landed now. And that's really what we're trying to focus on, is creating this kind of bespoke coaching service for our clients in our early alpha stage, so we can figure out how do we scale this out to as many people as possible so that they can have that aha moment. And when we see that aha moment happen, it's like, it's magic. Like the ritual becomes something that they can't live without. They enjoy it. They're doing it 2-3 times a day. They're buying 4 bags of coffee at a time. Like it's a complete 180, right? And so this is great not only for those people, but it's great for the industry, because it's hopefully going to accelerate the adoption of that mindset shift of coffee is not just a commodity, it's also a value add, not only for the drug part, but for the actual like taste and enjoyment part. And so that should hopefully lead back to farmers and producers and importers and everybody who kind of gets squashed along the chain, more of that value.
Yeah, that productization curve is huge. I know. So I buy a lot of my green beans from Sweet Maria's in Oakland, and they're phenomenal. I'll give them a shout out because I've gotten my roasters from them, and everything through the years. And they always place a lot of emphasis on this is where it's coming from. I think a lot of that provenance, if you will, that origin gets lost. We walk into Starbucks and we see there's the Komodo, or Verona or whatever, and you kind of look at it and you go, I'm gonna pay 18 for that? Are you kidding me? Like, I don't know anything about this, or the general critique that Starbucks is over roasted, which whatever. Yeah. I worked there a long time ago, 20 years ago, actually. I can probably attest to some over roastiness, but relative to everything, there is that curve, that unknowing aspect of it, right? There's obviously economic value in supporting those who are doing this. And hopefully by supporting them, there's also a sustainability thing in the back end, right? So much is being said today. I mean, we've been witness to it within even the past couple of weeks, right? The incredible amount of fires and devastation that's happened in California and in Colorado. And that's, trickled its way across the United States. I remember seeing the sun turn bright orange and haze out there. But these sustainability things, like we want to focus on this, and by supporting those, kind of in a weird fashion, it actually prevents that kind of overstimulation, if you will, or overbearance on the ground. And finally that economy of scale too. I think I remember I still have my French press, and it's been, I think, about 6 years. That's something that I spent $20 on when I got it, but that's something that's persisted. And people don't realize I'll spend $30 on 100 K-cups from Amazon or whatever, and it's gone like this. But this is something that now all I need is water, I need grounds, and by the way, that bag of coffee can last for a heck of a lot longer. Oh, yeah. If you do it right. So you talk about all this accessibility and, turning that light bulb on, that light bulb moment of, hey, this stuff actually tastes amazing when it's done in the right way. Yeah. So walk me through, and don't give away any secret sauce if you don't want to, but, walk me through kind of that approach, because all this crap that I have on my desk over here, represents a significant investment, if you will. Yeah. Things, and it's not about the things really, it's about the people and it's about the process. So give me a little insight into First Bloom and what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest word for us, there's two really. There's empathy and agency. Those are the two main kind of pillars of how we want to operate as a company and how we want to help our users. The empathy part is because we understand that there are different socioeconomic situations. There are different levels of want and need as well. And so what we do right now is we're working very closely with the people that we onboard to figure out, okay, what do you have? What can you get out of that? And how can we operate within that? And are you willing to spend a bit more to get to where you might want to go, right? And so those are kind of our key questions at the start. And then we take that and we kind of shape the rest of the experience around that. So if someone is super new, we had a client who had absolutely nothing. Great, let's get you a grinder, a V60, and a kettle, right? And they were willing to pay up for that. It's like, awesome. Brought them in, and then from there, we're coaching them on how to brew that coffee and how to use the equipment, and also understanding what's happening. And that's where the agency part comes in for us. Is you see, if ever you've spent any time online looking at Blue Bottle, or even Starbucks in some cases, Reserve, or any even micro roaster, they'll have parameters for their coffee. Here's how you do it in a V60 or a Kalita Wave or French, whatever. All of that is irrelevant unless you have the knowledge of what those mean and how to even affect those things. And so a 1:16 ratio at this grind size for 7 minutes might not be the right recipe for you anyway. So why does it matter? Why do any of these numbers matter? So then we basically spend the rest of the time unpacking that. We'll focus on technique, and then we'll focus on unpacking what extraction is. How does agitation affect your brew? What are the stages of extraction, so that you can lean more towards one direction or the other? And I feel like I may be giving away a little bit much, but it's also one of those things where we've spent so much time with our clients that I think it's going to be hard to replicate the experience perfectly anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm more passionate about making sure people understand the value than anything else. So if someone takes this and does it better, awesome. Because at the end of the day, we just want to celebrate coffee and get people to celebrate it more.
Yeah, you're building community. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I'm watching you obviously through the Zoom thing, and you're lighting up when you're talking about this, and that's a sign of somebody that has passion for something, right? Passion for purpose. Yes, this is a great delivery vehicle for that kind of that passion, that intent, like you're saying. And I love empathy and agency. I mean, that's my marketing brain, which is what I do as a day job. Like within the tech space, and we're always looking for simplification.
Yeah.
We're always looking for, how do you distill the values of this very complex topic? And trust me, as you've illuminated, as I'm showing you here, it's very complex. But how do you distill that down to somebody like walking in the door? How do I communicate? On my side, how do I communicate the ideals of artificial intelligence and 5th generation wireless networks? Because everybody, like, oh my God, this is what Rogers is doing this week. This is what AT&T is not doing this week. You know what I mean? Like. But being able to show people in the moment, like you said, and you identified it early on, that moment that light bulb kind of shows up, existential light bulb. Hey, I understand, enlightenment has happened. You've not only got a convert to your ideology as it relates to coffee, but you've also built a relationship. You built trust there. And like you're saying, again, somebody can come and take this. I'm sure those bespoke, coffee services, it's a great idea. I actually love it. Like those are the type of things that, and I was, I'll plug the little Stem and Bean coffee shop here in my little town, which is unfortunately closed due to COVID right now, but it'll be back. It'll be back. But one of those things is I got the chance to roast out, use my roaster outside in the patio there, and it's an open area. And then people come by and they're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What's that smell? You've experienced this, no doubt, that sickly sweet caramel, like right after first track, and you're going in and you're, it gets nauseating after a while, to truth be told, if you're just sitting there and just like huffing coffee. I don't know. It's a different type of application of the drug inside.
Maybe something there.
Yeah. I know. Well, coffee scented candles are about as close as I get to that, that kind of thing. But, the curiosity, we're social creatures. We want to know what other people are doing. It's, we almost can't help it.
Yeah.
So that conveyance of, I'm teaching you, really that value chain that gets propagated there. You go and show other people what you're doing. By the way, it'd be nice if you came back to me, because I can probably do some more stuff. But like doing that ongoing thing, I think it's powerful. I mean, and you said it well, empathy and agency. So take me past those initial meetings. Do you kind of wrap back around down the road? Like, do you introduce more advanced type? I say advanced, but like choose your poison, right? You go into alternative things like nitro, or do you like, what's kind of on the menu, so to speak?
Yeah, right now we're really focused on people brewing with filter as much as possible. We have a couple of clients who are playing around with espresso. We like to avoid that, mostly because it's the most finicky and complicated. And that's also where a lot of frustration can lie for people, is they'll get into coffee with the mindset of espresso is specialty. And that's a whole other thing that we could unpack. But that
future episodes there.
Just
warning you.
Totally. But so kind of walking through the filter steps a bit more is we'll make sure that they're confident to a point where they can identify what their extraction is like. So after we kind of get technique down and kind of understanding the agency aspect of how can you affect certain variables to get the results that you're after for a specific coffee, it becomes a conversation around taste, and then it becomes a conversation around replication and consistency. And we've had a couple of clients who were like super into it and really interested in the whole idea, starting to share their recipes with us. And like we're now doing their recipes at home, and we're giving them feedback, and like we're going back and forth. And that has been kind of like, okay, we've taken you from what we call coffee curious to almost post barista, which is like you're almost falling out of love with coffee and you're kind of getting into the technique. And now any coffee will do, I just want to brew it. And so that's kind of the trajectory we're seeing. And that's really where we think we're going to add the most value early days, is that 0 to 1. And as we continue to grow, it's recapturing that, right?
Yeah. I think there's and I think there is a level where, I know my fascination with brewing techniques, I got got the opportunity and privilege really to do some of the barista level work. Starbucks, actually Starbucks, I avoided anything behind the espresso machine as much as possible. And this is back in the day when everything was manual pulls too. So none of the automated one button, 22 and a half seconds and, perfect pressure, 11 bar or whatever it was, to, being able to do this at the local coffee shop and realizing how badly I sucked at it. Right. And like you're saying, the nuance is everywhere. I mean, you fuck that cup up. Yeah, you're redoing it.
Yeah.
And it's time, effort, energy, compaction, all that kind of fun stuff. I think there is a certain disillusionment that happens. And we'll call it disillusionment. It's probably not, you used a better term for it, which escapes my ADD brain right now, but like that almost beyond barista.
Yeah.
Where it becomes rote, it becomes mechanical. Like I know, all right, kettle's on, hit boil. I have 1.25 liters of water in there. I know what I have, my 8 scoops in my French press, 8 tablespoons or whatever it is, which some ratio whatsoever. I'm going to fill it up to this level. I'm going to wait 5 minutes, compress, done. Now that's going to last me. This one will last me. I mean, I'm only that far away. This is going to last me, for the morning. All right, then rinse and repeat. Oh God, I got to clean the filter. I got to clean the screen. I got to do all this stuff. Well, if I leave it in the sink, it'll turn into mold. And by the way, coffee mold's going to kill you. All these things. And you get into this point where it's like, why bother? Right.
Yeah.
It becomes almost too mechanical. So I like the idea of reigniting those fires. And maybe that's something that, you're able to see. Like, I think you mentioned the Chemex, like I've had Chemex maybe 2 or 3 times in my life. It's like not something I've normally done.
Right.
So for me, like doing the pour over here from Goat Story, I'll give them a shout out because I did sponsor it and Kickstarter. Like doing pour over for the first time, just paper filters, pre-soaking, doing that stuff, and following their examples, kind of going through the app and figuring out, okay, this is a weight that they want to do. You do end up finding a way, and there's something magical and mysterious that led me to roasting. Like, hey, I want to take control of this moment. Like this is my sunrise. This is what I want.
Yeah.
And doing that. So reimagining that passion, I think, again, you're excited about this. This is passionate for you, and being able to convey that, through the means of empathy, but also through the means of community. Like you're saying, taking those recipes back, I think is huge. And do you see yourself setting up, even as your company grows, doing something like an online community? I'll call it coffee Twitter, for lack of a better way, or coffee LinkedIn. I mean, whatever. Choose your poison. Coffee Facebook. I mean, that's terrible. You'll be stealing all their analytics, and we don't want to do that. Do you see yourself doing something like that, where it's like kind of an open exchange, like an open market, or what?
Yeah, that's kind of in our plans. We, my co-founder and I have been talking about it a lot more recently because we've really been trying to think about, okay, what is the value created and what is the value captured? And I think that us recapturing that value creation from our community is, if we don't do it, it's a lost opportunity. And it becomes also a way for these people to bond with each other and find that sense of, I don't know, understanding how other people live, how other people brew their coffee, what their rituals are like. How can we kind of get the best out of this cup? Maybe we're teaching them wrong things, and the community will kind of call us out, and we get better and we get stronger, right? And that's where that candid feedback comes in. And I think that by us having that message board, whatever you want to call it right now, it creates that sense of accountability for everybody who's involved. And especially if we're, trying to work with a limited set of coffees that you can order. Everyone can have more shared experiences. You can understand the differences in water from one county or one province to the next, and how you guys can optimize your brews for that, right? And so there's so much that you can do with the data and with the coffee and with how it's processed, how it's roasted, how it's grown. It kind of becomes endless. So that's definitely kind of top of mind for us.
Sure. So we remove COVID from the world stage.
Yeah.
What would your, again, don't give anything away from your trajectory and your plan, but, as it stands today, in September, COVID's not around. You're doing what? Are you still engaging one-on-one in person with, with your customers? Are you doing a storefront? What are you looking like? What's your end game there? What are you trying to do?
Yeah. So I guess it's kind of twofold, because there's 2 scenarios, and maybe you can clarify a bit. If COVID never happened, we'd be on a very different trajectory. I can guarantee that. If COVID stopped today, I don't think we'd change anything. I think COVID gave us the permission to explore something else. And it was actually a chat with a kind of mentor investor person who brought up the idea of creating some form of marketplace. And that was kind of a catalyst that brought us down this discovery path, right? And it was through that we understood the untapped potential is really here. And so I wouldn't change a single thing that we're doing. I think we're on the perfect trajectory no matter the landscape, basically.
You actually got to where I was badly asking. I've seen this happen. I interviewed had a conversation with a startup out of Belfast called NetMinds, and their idea is connecting mentors to mentees, right? Bringing startups into communication with each other and to, people within the community, looking for funding or whatnot. And they actually had a pivot because of COVID. And that pivot ended up leading them to the place where they needed to be, right? So we always have this plan, my life would be this. I'd be traveling internationally right now. I'd actually probably be in Ireland right now based on my academic studies and whatnot. But where I ended up, blessing in disguise, in a terrible, terrible, horrible disguise. This is literally the sheep wearing the wolf's clothing, is where you needed to be. And so, again, I'll just reflect back to you a little bit. You're comfortable where you're at. You're excited with where you're at. And it's actually giving you opportunities to, like you're saying, explore, take a chance on something that, had the world been different, it wouldn't be in the place where you are. So I think that's great. You had the flexibility and, young, agile company, right? So.
Yeah, definitely. And I do also want to illustrate that I do think that COVID was a blessing in disguise for us as well, because there is, the at-home coffee adoption fucking skyrocketed since then, right? People were like, I don't know what to do now. I don't have cafes. I don't have a work espresso machine or a drip machine. I don't know what to do. So that definitely does play a part into our feasibility. I think it accelerated more than it shifted. But I do think that at-home consumption mindsets will have changed because of COVID. And I don't foresee as many people going back to not brewing coffee at home if they have their aha moment, which quite a few people have. But I think there's still something to be said for a cafe. You can't replace that experience. But being able to invite people over and brew like a big pot of coffee for 7 people and all have them go through that oh shit moment. Yeah. It's magical, like seriously magical.
Well, Alex, I appreciate your time today. It's been illuminating, if you will. And, you've got a great perspective. I think, again, there's a lot to look at the world and say, hey, it's not where I want it to be. It's, I'm feeling pretty depressed about it, but it's also another thing to kind of grab the opportunity there. Like you're saying, blessing in disguise. It's been terrible. It's affected people in awful ways, not to minimize that whatsoever. But I think within the excitement and within your passion, you've been able to carry something forward. You've been able to bring meaning, to something that, like you said, has been a commodity and now can be more than, it's still maybe commoditized on the market, but it's something that you can bring more purpose and intention to. And by doing that, you're building community, you're building relationships, you're building trust, which is, again, cornerstone. I really appreciate your definition. It's great. Actually, there was enough nuance in there that it's different than what I've heard from other people. Not a lot of people bring up trust necessarily. Maybe it's implied, maybe it's not, but you explicitly stated it. So it's something you're noticing. And in a world that's kind of sucked in and kind of forgotten the social, right? Because we have to. Yeah. It's nice to see that your emphasis is bringing social back one cup at a time, if you will. One idea. Oh, that was terrible. No one ever used that.
I already took notes. That's
cool. I can see it right away. That'll be a cuppa later. But anyway, so I appreciate you coming on. Discussing at random with this guy from Twitter and about something that we have a common interest in. Yeah. So really appreciate it. We will dive into, I promise you, when you can spare the time, we can dive into the espresso conversation because it intrigues me. And it does. Yeah. There's enough of my technical brain that kind of goes, oh, right. This is great. We're dealing with a lot more. We can talk about the Clover, the Clover press as well. That came out of MIT, which is phenomenal too, but don't want to give too much away. So thank you for your time. Thank you for all the way from Boston to Montreal, folks. I encourage you to go to firstbloom.co and sign up, especially if you're in Ontario and in Montreal. I guess that's your region locked right now for a little bit, right?
Canada-wide is fine. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, do that for all my Canadian listeners, of which I'm sure there's a few. Go do that. Alex, as always, great to have you on, and I look forward to having a conversation with you again over another cup.
Same to you, David. I appreciate your time. And whenever, I could talk coffee literally for hours. So.
Oh, that's good. I've got hours for you. So
cool.
all right.